Da Fork. Hello. We are DebateSensei Wednesday. We got ourselves Matt Shapiro, Esquire.
Hello.
We got Tim CV, marketing genius. And then I'm Jared Kubika Miller, a moderately average debate coach. So
with a better goatee.
Oh, man.
If your debate coaching skills were anything like your beard growing skills, damn, you'd be great.
Yeah. I'm going long for the first time in like forever. So there we go.
Now you gotta shut it down again.
Gotta catch up with Shap there.
Yeah, old Shaggy over here. Yeah. I heard. I like it. I cut it short sometimes, and I like it long too. So that's what it is.
All right. Hey, I just want to say we just got the results. This is for posterity's sake. We got the results from the recall, and it was soundly voted down.
Good thing everybody spent so much money. Awesome.
Yeah.
Really grateful for that. Love the use of resources. Appreciate the millions of dollars of political, dollars passed back and forth. That's important.
Yep. All those important issues that were paid attention to so astutely, while we all also paid attention to this recall. It was good. It was really healthy for our democracy.
Oh man! All right, let's talk about something other than that.
So what's a fork?
The fork. It's my favorite. I felt like this was like my first step into advanced debate land. Okay, so it's kind of like after the stuff that you learn, that like basic case construction and refutation and stuff like that, and you want to take it to the next level. I think the fork is the next level. In short, it's where you run two contrary arguments with the goal that your opponents will have to link to one of them, and then you could just drop one and then take the other. I know a lot of people call it a double bind.
Yeah,
and I think I think that's. I was looking up double bind. It's actually like a psychology term.
It's actually a BDSM term for all of you who don't know that. Yeah.
It's not novice. It's an advanced technique.
Yeah, it is. And so
Bill double bind.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to kind of explain it sometimes too, though. But I think what really triggered it for me was when you had arguments about topicality, and then you would have a contrary position about your a disadvantage, and basically you're saying that you have to link to one or the other. Oh, either this disadvantage links, or you're not topical.
Right. You're coming from the position of the neg, by the way, just to be like kind of setting the stage, right, for anyone who's listening to this right now and doesn't follow right with you.
Yeah. So it's not an amazing example, but when it came up first in round that I really remember, and it was actually at a national tournament, and the judge was cool enough to delay the entire damn tournament and probably break all the rules in doing so, but broke down exactly how and why the round was supposed to go this particular way. So the topic was very straightforward. It was legalized marijuana. And so we were on the negative side. The other team said, okay, yeah, we're going to legalize marijuana. We're going to treat it like cigarettes, or we're going to legalize marijuana and it'll be basically just like cigarettes.
Mm-hmm.
And then what we ran was a disadvantage that said, hey, you're now running the risk of high driving, right? Because if it's just like cigarettes, you're allowed to do it while you drive. So intoxicated driving, now you're making that a real problem.
Right. And
then they came up in the member speech and said, well, no, it would be enforced or it would be enforced like alcohol. Now, that's not exactly as straightforward. That's a moving target. There's an entire procedure for that. But what we said was okay, cool. So moving target, but topicality, you were supposed to legalize this and make it like a normal. I realize it's actually a worse example the more I explain.
No, you run your example. Your example is similar to Jared. I mean, he said, yeah, by treating it just like cigarettes, you're running into a. I'm going to presuppose your disadvantage, which is like auto safety or something like that. Saying, well, hey, there's a disadvantage here. If you allow that to be regulated like cigarettes, then there will be a bunch of car accidents, presumably. And somewhere you'd have to find some evidence for that. But I think that's kind of where you were steering it. Or, you're going to, in this case, it wouldn't be a topicality or you're a moving target, which is also a reason to vote against the case. But what you're doing is you put them in a fork where you run into the disadvantage or you run into a moving target. I mean, like you were mentioning with topicality or disadvantage, Jared. Go ahead.
A better example would be, if we ran a topicality saying they're not specific, they don't specify. So it'd be a little bit of like a plain specificity.
Vagueness.
So I guess can run topicality and say like bright line, and you need to be able to declare how you're what you're pegging this to. So are you making it 21? Are you making it 18? Are you making it driving? Whatever. So that could have just been like a plain specificity or a topicality. You can kind of fit it into that. And then also run the disadvantage on driving. Right. And then said, you choose either grant our links that, it runs the risk of intoxicated driving, or you bite this topicality by not being specific enough. Mm-hmm. Like, so it'd be like a plain vagueness spec more than T, but that would be a better example. I thought through once we got there.
Yeah. So here, let me throw out one. All right. So it's like we should colonize Mars. All right. So if that's the resolution. Now, remember, the fork is usually something that comes from the negative side. So let's brainstorm on the negative. Now, I want to definitely go for the potential destruction of life on Mars. And so my argument is I'm going to have a disadvantage about contamination, biocontamination if we send colonizers to Mars, right? We are going to contaminate that planet, and we should not do that. So if we send any biological stuff over there, then that's going to be all right. And so, and then you prepare a disadvantage about how the term colonize, by definition, means you have to send living things. You need settlers. Okay. So when the affirmative then comes up and says, we're going to send drones, no biology whatsoever, I'm going to say, that ain't colonizing. Okay. Because you have to send something alive over there. And if you do, so either you meet this definition and you say that there is some life that is going to Mars as a result of your plan. And therefore topicality goes away, but then you have to deal with contamination.
Danger.
Disadvantage with the contingent counterplan. You know what I mean? And so that is kind of what I'm going for. Is that you could foresee, like, if you were on the affirmative,
right?
How can you screw somebody over through the way that you define something, right? You got to really think that way. It's like, how would somebody try to screw me over on this topic? And then you're like, okay, let's all be fair here and say this has, like, I should be allowed to argue disadvantage X. According to this topic, my disadvantage should be relevant in all cases.
Contamination is your, which was your example, right?
Yeah, right. And so, like, when they come up and say no link, we don't send any biological stuff over there. I'm like, yep, now you're losing on T. See,
and you will preload that. So you'll mention in the topicality. Now, note. We're going to run this disadvantage, or you can even say in the link scenario when you get to that level on the disadvantage, be like, note, if they say no link right here, look to the T sheet, because that means that they are, biting straight into that. That'd be a spike, right?
Yeah.
So
you can't do that.
Like the trap is laid. Like they have to pick one or the other, and you can make that completely explicit. You could be a little squirrely about it if you wanted to, but the times that I've seen it most effectively used is when it's made very explicitly, because then the member just has to come up and say, like, hey, we laid it out very straightforward, that we gave them either option. They still tried to squirrel their way out. They lose on T, or
like, my thing is, I think it actually preserves the debate even better. You know what I mean? Yeah. That when we're talking about colonizing other planets, for instance, I think whether or not we should be contaminating other, heavenly bodies, for lack of a better term, like, is something that is ethical. You know what I mean? It's like, and so if you're going to if the affirmative is going to try to sidestep that entire debate by coming up with some tricky reimagination of what the term colonize means, like it's actually hard to have a debate. You know what I mean? It's like, no, let's return this right here. So either let us have the debate that we're supposed to have, or lose on tea. You know what I mean?
And just to, in the refutation of something like that, you could argue, what colonization means is up for interpretation. And, Jared, I guess what I'm just trying to say is, in responding to this fork argument, at least the one you just made, that is grounds for argument still. And you're going to be competing between Webster and whatever dictionary or meaning you have. So be prepared for those things. But that so much of the fork is making that feeling, creating that notion, that logical inference in mainly the judge, but also the other team, that this really is a crystal clear, issue that can only go one of two ways. And so often people will adhere, or they won't know how to wiggle out of that position. Which is kind of just more of the eloquence, the performance of it. It comes out a certain way.
It also shows an effort, like, from the negative side. Let me give you a different example. All right. So the United States should increase the minimum wage. All right. And you're like, okay, on the negative, you should be thinking, if they don't raise it enough, I have this disadvantage. All right. And if they raise it too much, I have this disadvantage. You know what I mean? I have like a solvency takeout versus
so this is a fork between two disadvantages, whereas the last one was a fork between a T and a disadvantage.
Right. Mm-hmm. You could do it that way. You could even layer another thing on top of it. I would go up to their plan, and if they don't specify how much they raise it, you could say, listen, your vagueness argument is that, hey, if they don't specify how much it is, then we don't know which one of these disadvantages to run. So we're going to run both of them. We're going to run both of them.
Right.
All right. And we'll see where it falls. All right. It's treating the constructive case as separate than the rebuttal. You're you're laying the trap for the rebuttal. It's kind of like, I want to see where this goes. You tell me what you choose. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Like in your minimum wage debate, if they didn't specify a number,
right?
A minimum wage. If they were saying, "Oh, it's going to be per capita, it's going to be something," or like, "Oh,
we won't have a philosophical discussion about the merits of generally raising the minimum wage."
Right.
All right.
And now you have your disadvantage. It's not enough. The minimum wage hike won't solve for poverty, X, Y, and Z, whatever other disadvantages. Or it's so high it will. One of the just to go here, people stop hiring, jobs are lost, they're lost to the machines, all that kind of stuff. But the fork is there. The point Jared's making is, two disadvantages, and they get to pick which one they fall into.
Yeah, and the vagueness kind of forces them into one or the other if they're not being specific on it. But I like that approach. I haven't actually seen that done where people run literally opposing links. Right, of like they do it too much, they do it not enough. I think you mentioned previously, like on enforcement, that can be done as well. Like you enforce this way too, like you're being way too harmful with this, and like putting people away for 15 years or whatever, or you're just giving them a fine. That's not enough. So kind of forcing them to say and running that at the same time. There's not enough, and there is too much enforcement. Now, as a coach, I would advise a student that finds themselves up against something like that. It is usually safer if you say you're like between a topicality and a disadvantage to grant the links to the disadvantage. Unless, like Matt says, like you can get creative and reasonably actually wiggle your way out of it.
Right.
The common idea is to grant the link to the disadvantage and then try and outweigh on impacts or try and turn something
downplay the disadvantage altogether.
Because the topicality is a one-shot kill. Like that's a one argument win typically, or like that's how people will see it. So don't try and fight the T debate unless you think you can really do better there. Instead, be like, nope, T goes away. We grant your link, and now just win at the disadvantage level because you might be able to outweigh or turn something.
Just to keep our smoking theme going, I think I'm remembering back from a few episodes ago, or maybe a lot of episodes ago. If the resolution was this house would ban smoking, right? I think that's one that Jared mentioned. You must ask them, or you must pin them down to some enforcement agency or some enforcement mechanisms. And if you ban smoking everywhere in your house, everywhere in the world, you can imagine what enforcement methods they would have to use to find out if people are smoking in their houses, and how that would be so intrusive that disadvantage would be loss of privacy, loss of freedom, or something to that effect. And then on the other side, the fork would be no enforcement. People are not going to enforce this rule. People are not going to quit in their houses. There will not be policemen looking in your windows, and this will not stop the problem. So there was a fork from this podcast in the past. I don't know exactly what episode.
The point is to outline both of them. And so basically what you're doing is, now some people would look at that and kind of go, oh, well, that's a contradiction. I just said the opposite thing 2 minutes ago. Why are you saying that I should make contradictory arguments?
Right.
And you can point out what you're doing in the meantime. I loved like springing the trap later on. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like that was my favorite thing to do. But you can kind of let them know that like this has been the plan all along. It was someone all along, right?
Right.
So yeah, you could do that, but I always like keeping it kind of a secret, and then you spring the trap in rebuttals. And this can happen anytime. Anytime you're covering more than one argument, you're basically getting ahead. You're taking the next step in the debate ahead of your opponent, and so now you're like, keep up, man. Like if you can. Yeah.
It really is. You said at the beginning of the episode, right? It's like one of the higher level things you figured out. One of the first things you made you feel like a good debater or whatever, where like you really spring a trap, and timing. What I was saying earlier, like the presentation of it is really important. So part of that, and a huge part of that, is timing. And what Jared's saying, another way is just because you hear something immediately doesn't mean the first question in cross-examination or like has to bite right at it, and you're supposed to just nibble away every chance you get. Maybe you set it up to where you want to lay it out like you're just under control, and you knew it was going to happen, and you're constructive. Maybe you ask some questions about it, or maybe not. But
it guides them further into it, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And it comes off like you knew what you were doing. And that's what.
But that's you should know what you're doing, and so that's like the last section is that you have to make a decision in the end. That's the point, all right? You can't
Both
just say.
Teams.
Yeah. That's the thing. You have to so on the affirmative, if somebody is laying this out. Now it doesn't always happen only on I'm interested in seeing somebody lay down traps like this in like an affirmative constructive, but especially when you have multiple people debating, it could be coming up in one of the constructive speeches. The point is though, by rebuttals, you have to wrap it up and make a conclusion. Right. So you're like, so listen, I laid these two things out. They chose this way. They chose wrong. Here we go. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, and so you can't just say, hey, I did this trick. Reward me with a win. You know what I mean? It's like you have to finish it. That's the hard part.
And draw out the implications of what the fork, the heaviness of the disadvantage or the heaviness of the topicality and how they fall right into it. Go ahead, Tim. Sorry.
You jogged my memory. I did see an interestingly laid, weird in its execution, but an interestingly laid fork on the affirmative. So it was
that was a dirty sentence.
An economic topic, and the team, so the AF went for had this entire framework, critical position around how making economic arguments only further entrenches the evils of capitalism and the evils of this imaginary system we've created that subjugates so many people and blah, blah, blah. So they had this entire, critique. And they said any arguments that have economic impacts are just biting into this. So you have to accept our alternative and say that we are exclusively human focused and all these things. And if at any point you are, engaging with the economy, you are part of the problem. You are, vote for the affirmative. So the other team came up and was like, sure, yep, we meet, like, capitalism's evil, it's awful, we agree, only human-focused things. And then the case itself had all of these things that were going to destroy the economy, right? Like, it was, do away with all currency, do away with all, all kinds of different stuff. And the team is like, hey, if you do away with currency, like, that's going to create all kinds of poverty, and that's going to harm all these economic systems. And they're like, there it is, gotcha. Yeah, like, you can't say that you agree with the critique and then start arguing economics. You have to go all in on one way or the other. And so that was like how they laid that trap out.
Or disagree with the premise, right? Yeah.
Oh man, my coach used to call that like Harry Potter debate, where it's like because we say it, it's true. It like comes manifest. It's, if you say taller, then you're a capitalist. It's like, yeah, that's Harry Potter debate.
Yeah. Especially like, when the other side like is so convicted into it, like, we just read 5 minutes of how like saying anything about the economy makes you this awful, evil bloodsucking person, and like the other side, like they're like, we agree with this so wholeheartedly, like our position is so firmly rooted in this, and the other side's like, well, I guess we better not say the word economy. And then as soon as anything gets even close to there, like, well, we are just playing the game of debate still, because like they, despite having that critical, framework, they still had a plan and they still had agents of action, like everything. It just operated off of like dismantling all economic structure, even though it was kind of like an economy focused topic. And that was kind of an interesting game to play, of like, it was like playing catchphrase, like, or like you can't use a specific word to describe it, or one of those like games that just seemingly forced their opponents into a weird box.
No.
Yeah. So I don't know, like you could start playing with the contradictions more and more and more. And I started dabbling with irony, you know what I mean? Where the fork, you could have like ironic forks. It made me like, when I look back on it, it just seemed kind of childish. But it was kind of fun. It's like, well, if you love it so much, why don't you marry it type of arguing. What was it? I had a crazy ass round where somebody wanted to like do education reform, and they suggested the ROTC. And so I had to critique on equivocating education, military with education. And then I ran a counter plan of mandatory service for everybody.
You one-upped them in the military department while telling them they had a bad plan.
And so what happened was like, they're like, forced military service is a horrible idea. I'm like, yeah, isn't it? Isn't it?
I was thinking,
oh, nice.
I was thinking like some ironic, like bigger picture ones would be like, look, if anyone's solving for like global warming, well then you're just like making it certain that humans are gonna nuke themselves into oblivion. So, but if you solve the nuclear into oblivion, then we're just gonna roast from global warming. So it doesn't matter what happens.
I'm sure I'm telling it a lot better 20 years after the fact than it actually went down at the time.
Well, if you're encouraged to like refine some of these, in my mind, brilliant. They're funny. They kind of add that layer of debate that's like, hey, these are words, and this isn't actually Congress. Like we can like talk and make points using logic, and that can win you around. So, I mean, go there. That's what I say.
I mean, but then you bust out like, oh yeah, we were just being ironic, and so it kind of sounds like you're just like weaseling out of it or something like that. But I mean, I
walked around to that once. That still makes me a little mad to think of it, because like I feel it was some just very straightforward down the middle plan, and we ran it straightforward and down the middle, and the other side ran a counter plan of like, we should only do this on like every third blue moon that like precedes a Tuesday, and it will be, we'll ratify it by like drinking a bottle of beer. It was like just some really stupid plan, and they're like, we're making this point because you're using the federal government to pass bills, and there's no way that like we ever all have our hands on the levers of power, and it's ridiculous to assume that we would actually get to fiat what the federal government does. It was like a really general like politics critique, but it was run in this way of like, and here's a counter plan that just points out how silly your position is. And we're like, yeah, that does sound funny. Sure, let's do it. Like perm, like that. Why not? And it wasn't until like years later, it was like, oh, I didn't get the joke.
Yeah.
I felt like we had a really solid case. Like everything went really well, and I was like, that was a weird argument for them to make. Like, term, they're not mutually exclusive. Congress can pass it, and they can also do it over drinks, or like whatever their silly counterplan was. Like, oh, they could do it over drinks. It's like, yeah, I don't see where there's a problem in that. And they're like, you missed it. Like, you missed the point. Like, no, you missed the point. So
no.
I have a rough memory. I don't know if this is relevant or not, and I brought it up before, but I'm bringing it up again. I had a resolution one time that said the United States and Russia are growing cold, and I was on the neg, and it felt the whole during prep time. This was a parlay round, but during prep time, everyone was focused on military, Cold War. And as we get in the round, I actually flipped. I looked at my partner and I was like, I have an idea, which is I have an idea and I want to go first, is what I said. And I went as the LO and ran a T saying, United States and Russia are on Earth and Earth is heating up. And the whole room laughed. I mean, I don't think for as obvious as it sounds now, like no one saw it coming. And I didn't see it coming. And then, yeah, so that's kind of your fork, right? It's like either it's true. By the way, this is a fact debate, it was a fact debate round. So it's either there's a topicality, you're talking about war and it's talking about temperature, or I'm right. The science is all saying,
Well, that one would be a little bit more consistent. You're kind of putting all your eggs into the global warming basket. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah. And so, the fork makes it so you're actually covering more ground. You know what I mean? And so that's the difference is where you're covering, like if they say this is stupid, then I get to say, yeah, I know. I knew it was stupid before you said it was stupid. You know what I mean?
I definitely said that also.
It's kind of what you're doing. It's a little, but it's still a good trick. It's still a good trick. You know what I mean? It's like if it's really clear that you are aware that like these two things are contradictory, but you're doing it for a point, I don't know. It's always kind of impressed me. But like the last thing is to contrast it with having multiple positions that are just freaking consistent with each other, right? Like that's the alternative to it, and that works also. In fact, I think that's way more common. That's what most of the time.
Any tips on responding to when someone forks you?
If you're attacked with a pineapple,
better than a knife.
So one thing is like there's fake forks, like people pretend that they're forking you and they're not. You know what I mean?
I feel like at least 50% of the time you'd be like, and by the way, they're in a double bind. They have to pick. Like, nope.
No, yeah. Like, first thing is always when you're doing refutation is always ask, is it true? You know what I mean? It is like, and then you start asking, all right, what can I say? The first thing is it a true fork? Do you have to do one or the other? And then pick one. You know what I mean? It's like usually they're not as scary as you think. You're like, I'm good with your disadvantage. In fact, that's when I figured out that like I was doing things to screw people over. And you start doing that less. You know what I mean? You start having the debate more. You know what I mean? You talk about the central topic that everyone knows is the central topic of the resolution. You start just engaging it more because you're not scared of these tricks and stuff like that. And so, don't be afraid of them. Usually one choice is worse than the other. Go for it. Just let the disadvantage link. Have a debate about the disadvantage. You know what I mean? That's what you're supposed to do. That's what a debate is.
Really?
Yeah.
But to Matt's point, though, like sometimes, or like you said, like asking yourself if it's true, the most common one that I see is when the word substantial exists. Like people get real, like they hear about this tool called a fork and they just really want to use it. So they run a topicality on substantial and then a disadvantage on it, crashing the economy. If it's like a substantial increase to minimum wage or substantial expansion of free Medicare or whatever. And so then they have this disadvantage. It's like crashing the system. Like, now you're in a double bind. Either it's not substantial and it's not topical, or it is substantial and it crashes the system. And I've seen teams like very calmly, very casually, like, it is substantial. Here's why it's substantial. Right. And here's why that amount will not crash the economy.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now the other side is just left there like, no.
Yeah.
Where they can go with it.
Challenge
all
the
your animal mastery
assertions in the fork. Challenge them. Don't they may come out logically, but they don't,
because you feel like you have to.
Yeah. Don't get forced into a corner.
Like, to be honest, the fork is best when you're hitting those teams that like to be tricky, and you you're flanking them is what you're doing. You know what I mean? You're like, no. But like, let's keep it in bounds here, and you can keep going forward now. So it works like that. All right, everybody. That was a fun discussion. All right. We'll see you next week, maybe, if we feel like it. All right. Matt, Tim, Jared, we're Debate Sensei. See you later.